All right, I think we'll get started, and as other folks join, we'll obviously let them in. Uh, this presentation today is on PCI compliance and nonprofits. My name is Ira Horwitz. I'm one of the founders of Cornershop. I have with me today Chris Carmody, who is one of our senior developers. We're going to be going through a variety of topics today let me just let others in. We're going to be going through a variety of topics today, really focused on PCI compliance and starting off with kind of what it is so that we have some basics and backgrounds. We'll also talk about some of the new requirements that are being put on websites and organizations and how it specifically impacts nonprofits. We'll also go through and talk about what an approved standing vendor is and if you at your organization needs one. And then we'll go through some next steps of what you should be doing at your organization. We will have plenty of time at the end for some questions. So please, throughout this presentation, feel free to use the chat and put any of your questions in there. We may try to respond as we go through, but most likely we'll save them all to the end and respond to those at the end. But for those who don't know and aren't familiar, Cornershop Creative is a digital marketing agency. We support nonprofits of varying sizes in everything from designing and building websites, hosting and maintaining those websites, and then also attracting new supporters by doing a variety of marketing tactics such as Google Ads management, SEO marketing, and email marketing management as well. So if you're interested in any of those services, definitely come talk to us afterwards. You're always welcome to email me, and we're happy to have those discussions. Today, though, we are focused on this PCI work. As I mentioned, please keep yourself muted during the presentation. If we have questions or want to have a discussion at the end, we're happy to unmute people then. But it will also might end up muting you if we hear any background noise. But for now, we're going to jump right in, and I'm going to turn it over to Chris to give us some background about what is PCI.
Yes, hello. As Ira mentioned, my name is Chris Harmony. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a senior developer who's been working with Cornershop since 2014. One of my specialties is technical analysis, or as I like to describe it, translating between technical and non-technical audiences. And that's what I'm going to be striving to do today for PCI standards. To get started, a little bit of historical context to give an idea of where we came from. Circa 2000, so about 25 years ago, every e-commerce site was losing, on average, 3.6% of total revenue to fraud. I'm going to repeat that, and because it's huge, that's 3.6% of total revenue across the entire internet was being lost to fraud. And that went on for years during the early internet e-commerce era. The various payment card companies got together behind the scenes, hashed out things for literally years. And in 2004, those impacted companies rolled out, in their own words, the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, which is a set of security standards designed to ensure that all companies that accept, process, store, or transmit credit card information maintain a secure environment. The PCI DSS was developed by the major card companies at the time. That was Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, and JCB to protect cardholder data from breaches and fraud. Now, for that translation, hands down, this is industry self-regulation, which was an attempt to limit liability, mitigate risk, and prevent the evolution of competing international and state-by-state laws. Flip this on its head. If you think about what we currently face today with privacy standards, where the EU has GDPR, California has the CCPA, the United States federal government has nothing in particular. That's exactly the situation that PCI DSS was created to avoid, and largely has done so far. Also, very important note, this is the payment card industry. So again, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover. It does not necessarily apply to other payment mechanisms like bank transfers or newer systems like Venmo. However, it's still a really useful set of security expectations, even if you are accepting bank transfer payments on your donation forms and whatnot. Next slide. Now, again, we have to imagine circa 2000, all of these major competing companies coming together to decide how they are all going to face this. One of the things that all of the C-suite did was they came together and they agreed upon 6 core guiding principles. These core guiding principles at that C-suite level are what inform everything else that the rank and file actually needs to implement. Those are build and maintain a secure network, protect cardholder data. Again, imagine all of that, almost 4% of all revenue lost to fraud. Maintain a vulnerability management program so that if a vulnerability emerges, you are aware of it and can react to it. Implement strong access control measures so that only individuals who need access to secure content can get that access. Regularly monitor and test networks, because you can set all the standards you want, but if you don't actually test them and make sure that they are happening, then are you really secure? And finally, maintain an information security policy. Oh, Ira, we are seeing a wrong tab. Maintain an information security policy. The core content there goes back to the old adage of you can't improve a process if you don't have a process. So this is making sure that you have a process and a policy around information security and are therefore able to test it and improve it over time. Now there are, Ira, do you want to reshare or should I snag that? There we go.
I'm sharing now. Yeah, sorry about that.
Perfect. Next slide, please. So those 6 principles at the C-suite level then spider out into 12 requirements. And this is where you get into the ridiculous section-based legalese, where it's not just requirement number 6, it's 6.1.1.1.2 says you must do this exact precise thing. Those, we are only going to be talking about 2 of these requirements today because they are at the heart of what is changing for PCI DSS in 2025. Specifically, that is requirement number 6, which is to develop and maintain secure systems and applications. And also requirement number 11, which is to regularly test security systems and processes. And if you're thinking to yourself, this is basically the exact same things that we just heard from the guiding principles, yeah, that's the point. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about, again, some history of what has changed and why. From the very first version 1 in 2004 up through version 3.2.1 published in 2018, only the websites and vendors that physically collected payment information had responsibilities under PCI DSS. Because of that, we had an entire industry built to facilitate getting paid without collecting the credit card information yourself. If you want to think about the PayPals, the Stripes, Authorize.net, and all of your donation platforms where you get to pick your particular payment processor, all of that came out of those original requirements applying predominantly to the person or the system that actually collects the personal and payment card information. That meant that if you embedded a donation form from, say, Every Action or Engaging Networks on your website had no responsibilities for PCI DSS because you, the website, was not collecting the information. Or if you had a Gravity form or an e-commerce store that the browser collected the payment information but sent it behind the scenes to some third-party processor like Authorize.net or PayPal, again, you have no responsibilities up until PCI DSS version 3.2.1. So you will see, even still today, if you go out and look at sales copy for a lot of these companies, it will say, hey, all you have to do is install this plugin or embed this form, and you will be PCI compliance. And that is still technically true for about another 2 months. We're going to talk about what's changing coming up here next. So again, all of the requirements were focused on payment processors, but then hackers. Specifically and most notably, in 2018, hackers placed a keylogger on the Ticketmaster payment page via a third-party JavaScript service that they used for analytics. Think like a Google Analytics, Hotjar, A/B testing sort of service that they were using. That got compromised, not Ticketmaster itself. And because that third-party vendor was compromised, new scripts were running on the browser that were not provided by or running on Ticketmaster servers that allowed the browser to sort of become a malicious agent itself, intercept every single keystroke. That means every email address, every full name, every physical address, every phone number, and all payment card information, and exfiltrate that from the browser over to the attacker's infrastructure. For Ticketmaster in this 2018 attack alone, honestly, Ticketmaster itself to this day doesn't know exactly how many people were affected between May and June of 2018. We know for sure that it was 66,000 credit cards that were compromised, abused, and had to be replaced. They suspect that roughly 9.4 million people's data was potentially affected. If you think about buying a ticket for yourself and you put in your payment information and then you put in the contact information for a dozen other people that you're also buying tickets for, that's where the numbers get really squishy. The UK does have an organization that is responsible for maintaining consumer privacy and protection, and they fined Ticketmaster £1.25 million in 2018. Quick historical aside, MageCart is a really weird name. Initially, the very first attacks of this type targeted a system called Magento, which is now Adobe Commerce. It's a third-party shopping software. Think Shopify. The name MageCart is a combination of shopping cart and Magento, because we technical people are good at lots of things. Naming things is not one of them. So Magento shopping cart attack becomes MageCart. In fact, e-commerce sites like Shopify and Magento are still to this day our primary attack surfaces for groups that do this. It's also worth talking a little bit about here how if we talk about a cold, like I have the common cold because I'm sick in the winter, it's dozens, if not hundreds of specific viruses with similar but distinct symptoms, but we just call all of them a cold. Same deal with MageCart. Any attack that is utilizing browser executed scripts on a payment page to capture and exfiltrate personal and payment information from the browser rather than the actual payment processor, we call that entire class of things a MageCart attack. A couple notable victims. 2017, they hit the Red Cross. 2018, they hit Ticketmaster, British Airways, and 8 US cities across 3 different states that use the Click-to-Gov system. 2019, they hit Forbes, Macy's, and Procter & Gamble. 2020, they hit Tupperware. 2022, they hit Segway, which was apparently still a thing in 2022. I'm guessing it's mostly aimed at malls and police officers. Go ahead and switch to the next slide. So never again. Remember, the payment card industry data security standard is industry self-regulation to limit liability and minimize risk. So here, over the course of 2017 to 2020, we have a completely new risk that has evolved and emerged. This introduces new liabilities to all of the payment processors and all of the e-commerce sites that are utilizing them. Therefore, PCI DSS introduces new requirements to mitigate this risk and limit this liability. Specifically, there are two new requirements that mean PCI finally applies to nonprofit websites and donation platforms. Those are the ones that you're hearing about lately. First up is 6.4.3. The top level requirement number 6, as a reminder, is to develop and maintain secure systems and applications. The pertinent part here that we need to care about and talk about is that all payment page scripts are managed. With this, we are going to mitigate the risk of someone compromising that third-party JavaScript library or even directly injecting browser code into your website, because all of the scripts are managed. Recall or imagine working in a secure office environment. Badging every single employee or contractor who should have access to that secure area, and then putting access points at all locked doors entering that secure area is a way that you can manage access, and you can verify that, yes, these are the individual humans who should have access to the secure area, and they are the only ones that can get in the door. Managing the scripts that run on your payment pages, very much a similar concept. Next page. Next up is 11.6.1. The top level requirement refresher here is regularly test security systems and processes. And the pertinent part of that entire big block of almost legalese is change and tamper detection mechanism to alert personnel to unauthorized modification. Bottom line, this means that at least weekly, literally send an automated fake browser to your payment page and check for any changes to any content and notify someone if you notice it. Big deal here. Not every page, just the payment pages. Don't have to worry about your About Us pages or your mission pages, board of directors pages. Don't have to worry about newsletter signups. Don't have to worry about advocacy signups. Dial your senator type things. All of that is perfectly fine. We just have to worry about the payment page. However, we have to worry about all payment pages, and foreshadowing. This means that multiple distinct payment pages each are going to need monitoring. Coming back to that secure office metaphor, thanks to badging and that managed access, we know who should be in the secure area. The equivalent here is once a week, randomly, let's do a periodic sweep and make sure that everyone in that secure building or secure area has a badge. They didn't just walk in behind someone, and that the badge on the person actually belongs to that person, that they didn't just enter with someone else's badge. So this way we are both managing access and verifying periodically that the access is actually being performed correctly. Great thing here, if we do this, we will never be in a situation like Ticketmaster in 2018, where this is happening for 2 months on our payment page and we have no clue. Worst case scenario, some new variant of the mage card attacks evolves and is able to sneak its way onto your payment page in a way that gets past your management. Worst case, you learn about it a week later and you can immediately shut it down. You have a much smaller window of opportunity for damage to your brand. Next slide. So let's talk about timeline. Why have you been hearing so much about this over the past couple of months and not previously? 4.0.0, which is the version that has these two future dated requirements that we're talking about today, was originally published in second quarter 2022. 3.2.1, the version that from 1.0 all the way up until then that we were totally fine under, didn't actually retire until Q2 2024. So starting in second quarter of last year, all of the audits, all of the checklists, everything that was coming out for PCI switched from 3.2.1 to 4.0. And everyone out there who interacts with the payment card industry who PCI isn't their primary job. That's the first that a lot of us heard about this, because we started seeing these requirements come up in audits and in checklists and saying, well, we're manage every script on a payment page and actively, routinely monitor those payment pages we're not doing that. We've never heard of that before, even though it technically had been published for the prior 2 years. So for the last year, behind the scenes, PayPal, Spotify, EveryAction, Engaging Networks, Blackbaud, anyone that you're working with have been frantically coming up and saying, like, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to respond to this? How are we going to guide our customers and our clients and our contacts in dealing with this? Cornershop in particular took a little bit of a wait and see approach. And we said, okay, how we respond to this and how we counsel you to respond to this is largely going to depend on what the other vendors and services you use as a nonprofit decide to say you need to do. Because if EveryAction's donation platform says we will handle 100% of this, then that's one recommendation. If, on the other hand, as I believe they say, you are going to be responsible for scanning your payment pages, and we will handle the technical back end of that management side, but you need to handle the monitoring side, that's going to change how Cornershop counsels and guides you to approaching this. That's the situation we're in today. We are now about 2 months out from implementation and these delayed new requirements going live. And for the most part, all of the major vendors that nonprofits work with have come up with specific plans and guidance and expectations for how their end users are going to respond to these. Which means that now Ira and I can have this session and talk to you about why we are suddenly hearing about this and what we recommend you do about it.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so I'm going to take it from there and actually talk a bit about that, of kind of what you as a nonprofit should be doing going forward to meet these new requirements. And basically, we see two real solutions here, one of avoidance and one of compliance. And so when you look at some of the requirements, we find that if you minimize the complexity by outsourcing any payment handling to a third-party provider, then your requirements are possibly nothing, or at least very minimal on what you have to do. And that's because it's not processing directly on your server. So for example, if you have a donate page on your website that just has a button that says donate through PayPal, and it takes you to a PayPal dedicated website where you have no ability to control or change or customize that payment form, that is going to be something that is kind of falls in this avoidance section here, where it limits your ability because all of the processing is happening on that, assuming PCI verified and third-party site. There are still some things you need to do, such as like verifying that it is actually a third-party site. Something like PayPal or Stripe usually is pretty good and is always on top of those things. If you're using something like Bob's Payments or something like that, that might be a little sketchy, and you might want to look into how they're handling PCI compliance. But definitely verify that on an annual basis. You want to make sure that all of the payment pages cannot be tampered with by unauthorized scripts. So this is just verifying that there's no third-party scripts on there. There's no way for someone to insert them to possibly change it or increase your vulnerabilities there. And lastly, you want to avoid embedding those custom widgets or custom scripts on your website, because that means that will shift and kind of find ourselves in the situation that Chris described with like Ticketmaster, where it wasn't Ticketmaster's form that got hacked. It was these third-party scripts that got hacked. and that took over your browser. So avoid embedding that, because you could find yourself in that same situation where maybe your Google Analytics code or even your Google font code that you're using to make your fonts display in a certain way have some script that hackers can take advantage of. Compliance is the route that we definitely recommend for folks who want to have any control over their site or use platforms that are a little more flexible. And with that, it does have some additional requirements that you have to do. You're going to, as Chris mentioned, you're going to have those quarterly vulnerability scans that are going to be, might be performed by a approved scanning vendor and need to be submitted to the banks and the folks monitoring all this. But basically, if you want to go with compliance, you're going to have to do the things that Chris talked about, of have a system to manage all of your scripts. So basically an inventory of what scripts are available, and then a tool to identify vulnerabilities so that it's obviously patched and fixed right away if there's any issues. With either of these approaches, and definitely anytime you're doing any type of scanning, it's encouraged and recommended you maintain those records for at least 12 months as well, because it's possible, even if you submit that data, it's possible that if there's some fraud happening on your site, that the banks could come back to you and say, hey, verify that you've been doing this. And that is definitely what we want to do. There are potential downsides that it can obviously impact your reputation. It can impact how the fees that you pay to credit card payment processors and other things. So this actually has some real life practical ramifications if you don't follow these rules and if you are found to be contributing to fraud. So who needs to meet these requirements? So as it's written, basically any website that has any payment form is required to have some sort of scanning management and identification of these scripts on your site. But there are a variety of other factors that'll impact an organization's actual requirements. The three that I like mentioning and I think are the most prominent are, first of all, the transaction volume. If you have less than 20,000 transactions per year, your requirements are a little less than those with more than 20,000 transactions. If you're over 1 million, I believe it is, transactions from there, it gets even more complex with some of the things. So knowing how many transactions you're processing with your payment processor is very important to determine what requirements you have to meet. The payment flow and integration method, this is just a fancy way of saying, what your payment form is looking like. So, for example, if you have a form that you're embedding, like a tool like Fundraise Up that gives you a script that you can embed on your main web page, that will will introduce some requirements as opposed to using different methods of linking to a hosted form, or even using something like a full API method. So lots of different options there, and depending on how your people are interacting with your form impacts what requirements you have. And then lastly, how much control do you have over that payment page? Are you using a platform that gives you no control, that won't let you add any functionality or won't let you customize that form? Then you may have fewer requirements than one that gives you the ability that you can style or introduce scripts onto your payment form. So how much control you have over that payment form is a big factor. It's really complicated, so we kind of created this nice little flow chart that we think is helpful, that kind of walks you through of what your requirements are based off of these few characteristics here. So generally speaking, if you are fully hosted on that third party, chances are you don't have any serious requirements, though definitely check with your provider to make sure that is true. There are some providers that are fully hosted that might be passing things on to you depending on how they're set up or your transaction volume and so forth. But generally, if it's fully hosted, if everything is happening on that third-party provider, you can't edit that form, you can't change those payment forms, chances are that's going to limit your requirements. However, if let's say you're doing something like embedding forms from a third party or have control over those payment forms. A system like Engaging Networks or typically a Blackbaud Luminate Online, you have the ability to add scripts onto your payment step. You can have that all in one page, and you can add your scripts there to customize it however you want. Those are going to give you some additional requirements that you'll kind of fall down the line there. We'll move on for a second there. The third one is that direct API integration. So if you're directly interacting with a payment processor, so you've custom built a form and you're just sending the data to some sort of CRM or payment processor, that's going to likely put you in the highest category of requirements, just based on the fact that that can increase. It has the potential to be less secure because it's not using something built in. But chances are most of the folks on this call and most people listening are going to fall in this middle area here, where you're then going to fall to the number of transactions you process. And again, we kept it simple and just focused on this 20,000, but there are additional categories if you focus on higher amounts. But generally speaking, if you have less than 20,000, you still need to manage the scripts that are on your site. You need to run the vulnerability scans regularly and document the results. You need to keep those results on file for at least 12 months. And then you only need to submit those results if you're explicitly requested to by your acquiring bank or a processor. The PCI DSS has created a what they call the SAQ, the self-assessment questionnaire, that all folks are required to submit. It's basically just a bunch of confirmation questions confirming that you've met all the standards, that you have that secure network, that you're running the scans, things like that. And so it's recommended that you do obviously complete that questionnaire. You don't have to submit it anywhere if you're in that kind of level where you have fewer than 20,000 annual transactions. But it's always a good idea to complete it and make sure that you're being held to the highest standards there and exceeding everything that's in that questionnaire. If you fall in that higher category, that puts you in the higher levels there, where the quarterly vulnerability scans, you still have to do all that I mentioned in the first one, but you also have to do quarterly vulnerability scans by an approved scanning vendor. So that's what the ASV stands for. So it's a specific firm that the PCI DSS has vetted and confirmed that they are going to scan your site and do it in the way that they want. And so there are currently about 87 of those. So you have a lot to choose from. We'll show you in a minute of how to get those. But through them, you'll still have to complete that SAQ. Chances are that firm, most likely, depending on how that arrangement works, will likely complete that for you, and they'll submit that with the results to show that you have completed and met all requirements. So how do you find a vendor, you ask? So as I said, there is a website. It is a listing here on the PCISecurityStandards.org website that shows you all of the approved vendors, that lets you filter, sort, and find the right ones for you. We at Cornershop, we have not vetted all of them. We've heard of and worked with a few over the years, but generally do not have any recommendations for who to talk to. I know our friends at Engaging Networks have vetted and gone through a lot, and they chose a firm called Control Case, who we've heard very good things about, and I know that Engaging Networks is working with. So we trust their judgment, and therefore that's definitely a good option. But definitely take a look and find one that meets your needs and your budget and is going to be effective for you. Yeah, we'll include that in the chat and can do that as well. There are some other solutions. So let's say you fall in that kind of lower reporting requirements where you just need some scanning, the vulnerability scanning done. There are a variety of services that are starting to emerge. As Chris said, we kind of took that wait and see approach because none of these tools had existed yet, and we wanted to see and know if there were going to be available tools that would do scanning on a lower level for hopefully free or a minimal amount without those submission requirements. And there definitely are a few that we've seen already. So Cloudflare's Page Shield is a tool that will do that management for you. It will identify and report on all the scripts. And then in the higher plans, they have the vulnerability assessment as well. Quality Community Edition does that same thing. It's a free tool that's out there. They also have some paid services as well to take care of the assessment questionnaire and some of the extra features. And Security Site Check is another tool that I know many folks use for other security features. They've incorporated this into their tools as well. So there are a lot of new tools that are coming out. This is changing, I feel like, daily, that there's all sorts of new tools and different platforms that you can use. So definitely be Googling for this. We'll post in there, and we'll obviously let folks know if there's new or preferred tools that can benefit the community. When in doubt, though, we do recommend using the approved scanning vendor. They are going to do things by the letter of the law. They're going to really work with and make sure that you have the most secure site and tools possible. And that's what our goal is here, is that we want to have less fraud. We want to protect our cardholder data. That's not only good for your system and reduces admin and headaches later on, but also sets your supporters and your donors at ease when they know that you are following these rules and regulations. So there are a lot of nonprofit donation management platforms out there, and we'd be here all day if we covered them all. But based on the ones that our clients tend to use, we wanted to address and let folks know as to what's happening with some of these tools. So Engaging Networks, they have, as Chris mentioned, they are requiring everybody to have an approved scanning vendor and have put that responsibility on the individual client, given that you're able to edit the payment forms, and every form, every page is going to be different. So they've created a bunch of tools in their infrastructure to make it easier to meet the requirements, and also given recommendations around the approved scanning vendor. So if you haven't yet been in touch with them, please do so. If you need any help with that, Cornershop can always help archive pages that don't need to exist anymore to reduce your requirements, change the way your forms are built to be less reliant on scripts, things like that. Blackbaud, specifically with their Illuminate Online platform, has taken the almost opposite approach, that they are changing the way you process donations. So they're taking away the ability to add some of those scripts and processing everything in a more secure form. And so they're taking on the scanning requirements, but you need to update all your forms to meet to have that new transaction widget so that you are going to be PCI compliant. Again, this is something Cornershop can help with. A lot of our customers, a lot of our clients use process payments in WordPress through tools like Gravity Forms, WooCommerce, Easy Digital Downloads. And there are a variety of tools that are PCI compliant that kind of take the avoidance approach. So PayPal Checkout and Stripe Checkout specifically give you that ability that you can essentially offload that payment processing to their servers, so that essentially, people, select their e-commerce products in WooCommerce and fill in all their information. But when they click, ready to pay, it takes you to the Stripe's server, so that everything happens securely over there in a form that you're not able to edit or control, or therefore introduce any vulnerabilities. Just so you know, both of those PayPal Checkout and Stripe Checkout have functionality that also do the opposite, that also let you configure it directly on page. So if you're using one of these tools, you also need to make sure you're using the PCI compliant version that offloads it, or you fall into those requirements of having to do the scanning. So definitely check out what approach you're doing. Cornershop can help you switch if you need to, or let you know what your current setup is, so that you can plan accordingly around that. Fundraise Up is a tool that we work with regularly, a platform that many of our clients use. And the tool itself is PCI compliant. Even their embeddable widgets are PCI compliant. But again, this raises the issue, if you're embedding the form on your website, it means that your website needs to be compliant. And as Chris said, it's just the pages where that widget exists. So if you only embed your widget on the home page, or embedded on the donate page, those are the only pages that need to be scanned. if you put it in your footer or maybe a pop-out sidebar or a pop-up that comes on every single page, then that might increase your requirements, and you will have to scan every page that it appears on. So just be aware of that. That is FundraiseUp's recommended approach, is to have the scanning and to use the embeddable widget, though they do also have hosted pages that kind of put you more in that avoidance category. And the last one I'll mention is GiveWP, which is a plugin that works natively within WordPress. And I know a lot of nonprofits tend to use this because it's really easy to set up and get going. They focus on PCI compliance with protecting the data that is submitted, but they don't do anything with confirming you have a secure environment or anything with management or vulnerability of scripts that might be there. So definitely, this is a tool that would likely put you into the more complex categories and definitely require an approved scanning vendor. So if you're using that tool, then I would definitely recommend getting started on finding an approved scanning vendor and starting that process. So in summary, first thing to do is determine what requirements you have. Take an inventory of how you're doing, how you're managing your payment processing, where that's happening, and how it's working, and identify what self-assessment questionnaire you need to complete. That questionnaire can often guide you in the right step based on the questions it asks. So those first two definitely kind of go hand in hand. But those are the main requirements that you have. You want to ensure that you're using a secure and reputable PCI compliant third-party payment processor. As I mentioned, there are hundreds. There are really great ones that are out there, and everybody's kind of taking a slightly different approach to it. So determine who you're using, make sure that they're following PCI compliant rules, and determine how you're embedding the forms or using the forms to meet your needs. Honestly, we recommend this for everybody, even if you don't have the requirements, that you should be conducting the vulnerability scans. You should manage what scripts exist, and you should be conducting those vulnerability scans. As we've said, the scripts are the main important thing. So a lot of times you will, when building the forms, you may just take scripts from your website and put them on your payment forms, and they might not be necessary. Things like Google Fonts or Google Analytics that might make things look a little nicer or track some additional data, but may not be necessary for the actual completing the forms. So sometimes you can change your forms and therefore get in a better place for the compliance. So as I mentioned, obviously you should complete and submit documentation when it's required. And you should always regularly review and update your organization's security policies. This isn't something we talked about, but is still very important to make sure that you're looking at this holistically, that it's not just one little aspect that you need to do to check a box, but that you're making sure that you're actually securing and protecting your supporters' data. So last thing before we get into your questions is how can we help? So first of all, as we mentioned, you need to scan any payment form. So one strong way to reduce your requirements is to have fewer pages to scan. And so we always recommend, if you have payment forms that people aren't using, to archive and redirect them. We at Cornershop did that recently. We had plugins that we were trying to sell, but people weren't purchasing. So we just removed the ability for people to purchase them because it wasn't being used, and therefore it was not necessary. As I was just mentioning, you can update your templates to be less reliant on the script code. There's a lot of ways to rewrite some of those scripts or have that same functionality without relying on the third-party scripts. So that's definitely something that can be done in some of your platforms. We can help you find an approved scanning vendor. So if you need help and you're not sure where to start, let our support team know. We can walk you through and figure out what requirements you need, and also help you find a vendor that will work with you on the scans. And then something we're working on for the smaller sites that have the lower requirements, we are working on identifying a tool that we can run some of that scanning for you. We can configure notifications, monitor the vulnerabilities, and then obviously update any scripts or patch vulnerabilities as they come forward. We should have more information about this over the coming weeks. We quite aren't ready to roll it out yet, but we are envisioning that we are going to have some add-on service for our support and maintenance clients who may not have the larger requirements. That being said, as I've said a few times now, when in doubt, always work with an approved scanning vendor. They're going to do everything effectively and in the best way that makes sure you're meeting all requirements. But if you don't need those requirements, or you want to go for a lower effort approach, there definitely are some things, and Cornershop can help you with that. So with all that said, I know it's a lot of information. We have about 15 minutes left. We would love to answer any of your questions. I'm going to turn over to the chat here. Yeah, we'll make sure that we include that one link. But if folks have any other questions, we're happy to answer those now.
And I know Dawn, I believe, had raised your hand earlier. If you still have a question there, please raise your hand and unmute yourself again, and we can respond to that, or go ahead and drop that into the chat and we can respond that way.
I think I was just, I missed the part, the number of transactions or the threshold for this.
The lower threshold is 20,000. And that is number of transactions through that particular payment mechanism, not necessarily, certainly not total monetary volume. They're looking at total number of transactions. And Ira, clarifying question there, is that for the organization across all payment methods, or is that like if you are in every action, for instance, is that 20,000 through every action, and then also maybe 20,000 through PayPal for another thing?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something I've been trying to get a definitive answer on myself, but I actually haven't. What I've been seeing and reading on the internet is that it is per payment processor, that it's per integration. So if you have engaging networks and a WooCommerce store, they might be separate, but please don't quote me on that yet, as it was not definitive, and still didn't find the right sources there. But that is, I believe, my understanding is it's per processor. But again, we'll be looking more at that. And again, as part of your questions to be doing this is when you do talk with approved scanning vendors, I think they can answer a lot of those questions.
Yeah, the other thing that I would mention tangentially is Ira, in my presentation at this webinar in general, has very much focused on the web presence side of PCI. PCI, again, is the payment card industry data protection stuff. So if you, for example, are working with a direct mail vendor and you have a donation form that you actually do direct envelope mailing for, and they can mail it back either to your organization or to that direct mail provider with their credit card and name filled out, that has a completely separate portion of PCI that applies to it. So I would certainly recommend checking with your direct mail provider about how they handle the real physical credit card information portion of that.
Any other questions? Here's from Sarah. If we believe we've taken the avoidance path, do we need to check with the third-party vendors that they are PCI compliant? It's just a good idea to do that. If you're working with an authorized.net or other tools, just have that on file somewhere to make sure that it's there. It's part of that self-assessment questionnaire, which you should be completing anyway. And so as you complete that self-assessment questionnaire, one of the questions is have you verified that your vendor is PCI compliant, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And for the most part, if you're taking that avoidance path, this should probably never come up, and you will likely retire never having needed to hand that over. The situation that could evolve would be your bank notices something, and your bank comes to your organization and says, hey, we've noticed some potential fraud coming into your bank account from deposits. Please provide your payment card industry SAQs to prove that you have checked all of the boxes and therefore should not be liable for this fraud. Or PayPal or Stripe could, or Authorize.net could come to you and ask the same. A lot of it, again, to sort of go back to the context for why this exists in the first place, it's all about minimizing risk and limiting liability to the payment card industry themselves. So their position is largely, if you are PCI compliant and you have complied with all data security standards, then if something goes wrong, fine, it's more or less on them. If you haven't complied with anything, then it's on you. So if you have a situation where fraud does wind up being connected to one of your payment pages, the possibility is that through an investigation on that side, they could come to you and say, hey, give us your self-assessment questionnaires. And that would be where you would want to be able to ideally say, yes, we are using PayPal, or I forget, Click to Pledge, whatever the Salesforce one is. And they have provided us their verification. So we're good, they're good. This is not an us problem.
Yep.
But ideally, like I said, all of us will probably retire without ever having to actually deal with this hands-on.
Yeah. Karen.
So just quick, make sure I'm looking at the right forms and stuff. If we have everything off going out to PayPal, collecting an address on our website, but all the payment stuff is happening over on PayPal's site, do we need to do SAQA or SAQEP, or is it a different form?
Yep. So it would be the SAQA is if you're kind of offloading most things to a different provider, that's the SAQA. If you're embedding forms from a trusted third party, that's where you need to do the EP one. And then if you have a fully custom one or anything, I think it's D is the third one that you need to do. But yeah, most folks will just have to do that A or the A-EP.
And I'll belabor this point a little bit because it can be very, very sort of twisty. When we say PayPal is handling the collection of the payment information, there are two ways that PayPal can do that. They can do it on your website or on your donation form, either with a modal pop-up window or by having the fields as part of the form. And then behind the scenes, it never touches your website or your server. It only talks between the browser, and PayPal comes back to the browser and says, hey, we're done. We've got the money. Or you can completely shift the browser away from your website 100%. You are no longer on your website in any way, shape, or form. And that's where PayPal collects the information. That's the one that does not require any additional activity or management of scripts on your website, because your website doesn't have the payment page anymore. And it sounds like that second one is your situation. I just wanted to make sure that that's abundantly clear, that even if it's something that PayPal is handling, if the payment page is still on your website, even if it's like a PayPal pop-up or something, that still counts as being your payment page.
Okay. And so since we handed off, you will now go to PayPal, that's the A, not the AEP. Okay,
Correct.
cool.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions? Well, we are always available to answer any questions or talk through anybody on their specific situations. You can always email me at just ira@Cornershop Creative. Our hello@cornershopcreative.com is our kind of general email address. And then I believe most of you have our support@cornershopcreative.com email address that our support team is happy to answer any questions or guide you in any way around your requirements. So please don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything that we can help with. But otherwise, we'll be sending this recording out to folks who registered and are happy to again, continue the conversation as we move forward. Well, thank you everybody else for attending and listening. Hopefully this was helpful and informative and clarified some of your requirements and things that you need to be doing. And again, feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thanks. Have a great day, everyone.